The painting should have never entered their home. Margaret should have never hung it on the wall, and when she first heard it whispering her son's name at midnight, she should have burned it immediately. But it was already too late. The painting, that changes. The Mitchell family had always dreamed of owning an old, charming house. So when they found a large Victorian home at an unbelievably low price, they couldn't resist. Margaret and David, along with their 8-year-old son Tommy, packed their things and moved in. The house had been abandoned for years, yet most of the furniture remained untouched, covered in dust and neglect. While sorting through the attic, Margaret discovered something unexpected. An old painting. It was large, nearly 4 feet tall, with a thick wooden frame. The image depicted a young boy, about Tommy's age, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. His expression was solemn, his brown eyes staring straight ahead. The paint was cracked, and the canvas had an eerie texture, almost as if the boy's face had been layered over something else. Margaret hesitated before carrying it downstairs. "Look at this," she said, showing it to David. David tilted his head. Creepy, but kinda cool in an antique way. Tommy, however, did not like it. The moment he saw the painting, his small hands clenched into fists. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't want it here." Margaret glanced at him. "Why, sweetheart?" Tommy didn't answer. He just stared at the boy in the painting. Margaret sighed. "It's just a picture, honey. Nothing to be afraid of." Despite her unease, she hung it in the living room above the fireplace. The moment she did, the air in the house felt heavier. A strange silence settled over the room, as if the walls were suddenly listening. That night, as they settled in, Tommy seemed unusually quiet. Margaret found him standing in the living room, staring at the painting. His small voice broke the silence. "His face looks different." Margaret frowned. "What do you mean?" Tommy swallowed. "I think he was frowning before. Now he looks scared." Margaret studied the painting. The boy's expression seemed unchanged. Maybe the dim lighting made it appear different. "You're imagining things, sweetheart," she said gently, ushering him to bed. That night, at exactly midnight, Margaret awoke with a start. Sound, soft, distant, echoed through the house. A whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she heard it again. A voice, calling her son's name. Margaret sat up. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was coming from the living room, from the painting. A shiver crawled down her spine, but she forced herself to get out of bed. The wooden floor was cold beneath her feet as she stepped into the hallway. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. As she reached the living room, the whispering grew clearer. It wasn't just one voice, it was several. "Tommy, Tommy, come play." Margaret's hand trembled as she flicked on the light. The whispering stopped instantly. The room was silent. Her gaze snapped to the painting, and then she saw it. The boy's face had changed. His eyes were wide, filled with terror. His mouth was slightly open, as if mid-scream, and his small hand was pressed against the inside of the canvas. Margaret stumbled backward, a cold sweat forming on her neck. The light flickered once, twice. Then, as if nothing had happened, the boy's face returned to normal, calm, solemn, staring straight ahead. Margaret's breathing was ragged. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination. But then, she noticed something else. The boy in the painting was now wearing the exact same pajamas Tommy had on that night. And on his cheek was a small freckle. The same one Tommy had. Margaret felt her stomach drop. She turned and ran upstairs. Tommy was still in bed, his face pale, his lips trembling as though lost in a nightmare. She leaned in, pressing a hand to his forehead, and that's when she heard him whisper in his sleep. "Let me out." Margaret stood frozen, watching Tommy's lips move in his sleep. His whisper was barely audible, but she had heard it clearly. "Let me out." A chill ran down her spine. She gently shook her son. "Tommy, sweetheart, wake up." Tommy stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. He looked disoriented for a moment before his gaze focused on his mother. "Mom," his voice was groggy. "Why are you in my room?" Margaret forced a smile, trying to mask her worry. "You were having a bad dream." Tommy blinked sleepily. "I was." He sat up slightly, rubbing his eyes. "I don't remember." Margaret hesitated. Should she ask him about the whisper? About the painting? No, he was just a child. She didn't want to scare him. "You should go back to sleep, honey," she said softly, tucking him in. Tommy yawned. "Okay. Good night, Mom." Margaret kissed his forehead, lingering for a moment before quietly stepping out of the room. As she walked back to her own bedroom, her mind raced. She had to be imagining things. The whisper, the changes in the painting. It had to be exhaustion, moving into a new house, unpacking, adjusting. That was all. And yet, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows as Margaret poured herself a cup of coffee. The warmth of the kitchen and the scent of fresh toast made everything feel normal again. David sat at the table, flipping through his phone, while Tommy ate his cereal quietly. Margaret watched her son closely. He seemed fine. No sign of distress, no mention of nightmares. Maybe she really had imagined it all. Trying to push the night's events out of her mind, she decided to focus on the day ahead. "I was thinking we could explore town later," she suggested. "Maybe check out the park." David nodded. "Sounds good. Tommy, what do you think?" Tommy didn't answer right away. He was staring down at his cereal, pushing the pieces around with his spoon. "Sweetheart," Margaret prompted gently. Tommy looked up. His eyes flickered toward the living room, then back at his mother. "Can we take the painting down?" Margaret exchanged a quick glance with David. "Why?" she asked. Tommy fidgeted. I just don't like it." David chuckled. "It's just a picture, buddy. There's nothing scary about it." Tommy didn't respond. He lowered his gaze, shoulders slightly hunched. Margaret hesitated. She didn't want to encourage any fears. But after what she had experienced the night before, she couldn't ignore her own unease. "Maybe we could move it somewhere else," she suggested. "Like the attic?" Tommy nodded quickly. "Yeah, the attic." David sighed, but didn't argue. All right. After breakfast, I'll take it down." Tommy visibly relaxed. For the first time that morning, Margaret felt a sense of relief. Something is wrong. Later that day, while David was at work, Margaret decided to handle the painting herself. She stood in front of the fireplace, staring up at it. In the daylight, it didn't seem as eerie. The boy's expression was still solemn, his gaze fixed straight ahead. She took a deep breath and reached for the frame. The moment her fingers touched the wood, a sharp, icy chill ran up her arm. Margaret gasped, yanking her hand back. The sensation was so sudden, so intense, that for a second she could have sworn the painting had pulsed beneath her fingers, like something alive. Her heart pounded. This was ridiculous. It was just a painting. Steeling herself, she grabbed the frame again. The chill remained, but she ignored it, lifting the painting off the hook. It was heavier than she expected, almost as if something inside it was weighing it down. She carried it carefully up the narrow attic stairs, the wooden steps creaking under her feet. Dust swirled in the dim light as she pushed open the attic door. The attic was mostly empty, aside from a few old trunks and forgotten furniture. She placed the painting against the farthest wall, exhaling in relief. There, she murmured. Out of sight, out of mind. As she turned to leave, a faint, creaking sound made her stop. She glanced over her shoulder. The painting had shifted slightly forward, as if something inside was pushing against the canvas. Margaret's breath hitched. It was just settling into place, that's all. She hurried downstairs, shutting the attic door behind her. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Tommy's secret. That night, Tommy seemed more relaxed. Without the painting in the living room, he played happily with his toys and even laughed at his favorite cartoon. Margaret felt reassured. Maybe things were finally back to normal. At bedtime, she tucked him in, smoothing his blankets. See, no more painting. Everything's okay. Tommy hesitated. Then, in a small voice, he said, "Mom, I think he's mad." Margaret's stomach tightened. Who? Tommy's fingers curled around his blanket. The boy in the painting. Margaret forced a calm tone. "Sweetheart, it's just a picture. It can't be mad." Tommy shook his head. "I hear him sometimes. He whispers. He says he wants to come out." A cold shiver ran down Margaret's spine. "When did you hear this?" Tommy hesitated. "Before we moved the painting." Margaret swallowed hard. "Did he say anything else?" Tommy looked down. He said, "I look like him." Margaret's blood turned to ice. The boy in the painting did resemble Tommy. Same age, same brown hair, same small freckle on his cheek. She forced a smile. "It was just a bad dream, honey. Everything is fine now." Tommy nodded but didn't look convinced. Margaret turned off the light, closing his door softly behind her. As she walked down the hall, she paused outside the attic door. She stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, she walked away. But that night, just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it again. A soft, whispering voice coming from the attic. Tommy. The attic door stood silent in the dim hallway. Yet Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something lurked just beyond it. The whisper had been faint, soft enough that she could have imagined it. But she hadn't. She sat up in bed, listening. The house was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the clock in the living room. David was asleep beside her, his breathing slow and steady. Margaret swallowed hard. She could ignore it, pretend she hadn't heard anything. But deep inside, she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep until she checked. Slowly, she got out of bed. The wooden floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she stepped into the hallway. She grew closer she got to the attic door, the heavier the air felt, thick, charged, almost electric. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. Just open it. Just check. Taking a deep breath, she turned the handle and pulled. The attic was pitch black. Margaret hesitated before reaching for the string that controlled the overhead light. She pulled it, and a dim, yellow glow flickered to life. Her heart pounded. The painting was exactly where she had left it, propped against the farthest wall. But something felt different. The canvas seemed darker, as if the colors had faded overnight. The boy's figure was still there, but his features were harder to make out. His face seemed hazy, blurred, like an old photograph that had started to decay. Margaret took a step forward. The wooden floor creaked beneath her weight. She didn't want to get closer, but something inside her compelled her to. Just as she reached the painting, the attic light flickered. The dim glow pulsed once, twice, then went out completely. Margaret gasped, swallowed by total darkness. She spun around, heart hammering. The air felt colder. The silence was deafening. Then, a soft, shuffling sound from the far end of the attic. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced. It's just an old house, just the wood settling. Then, something brushed against her ankle. She jumped back, her pulse spiking. She fumbled in the darkness, reaching for the attic door, but her fingers met nothing but empty air. Panic surged through her. The door was right there. Then, a voice, faint, whispering, right next to her ear. "Let me out," Margaret screamed. The attic light suddenly flashed back on. She spun around, breathless, trembling. The painting was different. The boy's face was no longer solemn. Now he was smiling, and his eyes, they were looking directly at her. Margaret stumbled backward, her chest heaving. No, this isn't possible. She bolted out of the attic, slamming the door behind her. She pressed her back against it, trying to steady her breathing. For a long moment, the house was silent. Then, thump, a single soft knock from the other side of the attic door. Margaret ran. The next morning, Margaret barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that boy's smile, too wide, too knowing. She told herself she was imagining things, that it was just exhaustion playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something was wrong with that painting. At breakfast, she forced herself to act normal. She didn't want to scare Tommy. But as soon as she set his plate down, he looked up at her and whispered, "You saw him, didn't you?" Margaret froze. Her heart pounded so loudly, she could barely hear the clinking of David's coffee spoon. "Tommy," she forced a smile. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" Tommy didn't answer right away. He stirred his cereal slowly, his gaze distant. "The boy in the painting," he murmured. "He doesn't want to be in the attic." Margaret's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. "Why do you say that?" Tommy's voice was small. "Because he told me." David chuckled, not noticing Margaret's pale face. "Tommy, buddy, it's just a painting. Paintings can't talk." Tommy lowered his spoon. "This one does." David sighed, ruffling his son's hair. You just have a big imagination, kiddo. Margaret forced herself to nod. That's right, it's just your imagination, honey. But Tommy didn't look convinced. Neither did she. The discovery Margaret couldn't ignore it anymore. That afternoon, while Tommy was playing outside and David was at work, she grabbed her laptop and started researching. She typed in every keyword she could think of. Old Victorian painting, haunted artwork, changing portraits. Most of what she found was folklore and ghost stories, nothing about their painting. Frustrated, she tried a different approach. She searched the house's history. That's when she found it. A black and white photograph of the house from the early 1900s. The image showed a family standing on the front porch. A man, a woman, and a young boy. Margaret's stomach dropped. The boy in the photo. He looked exactly like the boy in the painting. Same solemn expression. Same clothes. Same piercing eyes. A chill ran down her spine as she read the caption beneath the photo. The Calloway family, 1903. Pictured, Thomas Calloway, age 8, presumed deceased. Margaret's pulse thundered. Presumed deceased. Her hands trembled as she dug deeper, scanning old newspaper archives. Then she found the article. Her breath caught in her throat as she read. Local boy missing. Never found. 8-year-old Thomas Calloway was last seen in his family home before vanishing without a trace. His parents claimed he had gone to bed as usual, but by morning he was gone. No doors or windows were disturbed. Authorities searched the home thoroughly, but Thomas was never seen again. Margaret's fingers curled around the edges of her laptop. Tommy. The boy's name was Thomas. Tommy's full name was Thomas Mitchell. Her heart pounded in her chest as she remembered what her son had said. He said, "I look like him." The realization hit her like a freezing wave. This wasn't just any painting. It was connected to Tommy, and whatever was inside it wanted him. Margaret's hands trembled as she stared at the old newspaper article. The boy in the painting, Thomas Calloway, had vanished without a trace over a century ago. And now, the whispers, the changing face, the way Tommy had spoken about him. This wasn't a coincidence. A cold wave of fear settled in her chest. Margaret quickly shut her laptop and stood, her mind racing. She had to do something. But what? Throw the painting away? Burn it? She didn't know what was inside it. What if destroying it made things worse? A noise made her freeze. A soft creak coming from above. The attic. Margaret's breath caught. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto the ceiling. The sound had been faint, but she was sure she hadn't imagined it. The attic was empty. She had checked it herself, hadn't she? A dark history. Margaret didn't go upstairs right away. Instead, she grabbed her keys and left the house. She needed answers. The local historical society was only a short drive away. The building was small, its shelves filled with dusty records, old photographs, and bound newspapers. An older woman at the front desk greeted her with a polite smile. "Can I help you find something?" Margaret hesitated before nodding. "I'm looking for information about the Calloway family." The woman's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "That's an old name. Their house still standing." Margaret's pulse quickened. "You know about the house?" The woman gave her a curious look. Of course, the Calloway home has been empty for decades. Nobody stays long. Margaret's stomach turned. Empty for decades. But we just moved in, she said carefully. The woman frowned. That can't be right. The last owners left years ago. Margaret's blood ran cold. Had the real estate agent lied to them? She quickly changed the subject. Do you have any records about what happened to Thomas Calloway? The woman sighed. Yes. That poor boy. She gestured toward a row of filing cabinets. Give me a moment. Margaret waited as the woman searched through the drawers. A few minutes later, she returned with a thin folder. This is all we have, she said, handing it over. Margaret opened it and scanned the documents inside. Most of it was information she had already found. The news article about his disappearance, the old family photograph. But then she found something new, a police report. She skimmed it quickly, her pulse racing. The Calloway parents insist Thomas was in bed the night before his disappearance. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of him leaving on his own. Upon searching the attic, authorities discovered an unusual painting. Margaret's breath caught. The painting. Her eyes darted over the words. The painting depicts a young boy matching Thomas Calloway's description. However, upon further inspection, the painting's surface appears to have been altered multiple times, as if concealing previous images beneath it. Margaret's hands tightened around the paper. There were other faces beneath the paint. This had happened before. And then, at the bottom of the report, one final chilling note. Parents claim to have heard whispering at night, calling for their son. Margaret's entire body went cold. It was happening again. To Tommy. Rushing home. Margaret didn't waste another second. She thanked the woman hastily and ran to her car. She sped home, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. Her mind raced with a single, terrifying thought. The painting wasn't just haunted. It was a trap. And if she didn't stop it, Tommy would be next. The house was eerily quiet when she arrived. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but the air inside felt heavier, as if something was watching. Tommy, she called. No answer. A cold fear gripped her chest. She hurried through the house, checking every room. Empty. Then she heard it. A soft, distant voice, coming from the attic. Margaret's breath caught. She ran. The attic door was open. Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. She stepped inside, her breath coming in short gasps. The painting was still against the far wall, and in front of it, standing completely still, was Tommy. Tommy, she cried, rushing toward him. He didn't move. His small hands were resting on the frame, his fingers lightly touching the boy's painted face. Margaret grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently. Tommy, look at me. Slowly, he turned his head. His eyes were distant, unfocused, like he wasn't really there. He's trapped, Tommy whispered. Margaret's hands tightened. Sweetheart, we have to go. Tommy blinked slowly. He said he was like me. A shudder ran through Margaret's body. No, honey, you're not him. Come on. She tried to pull him away, but Tommy wouldn't budge. He's trapped, Tommy repeated, his voice softer now. And he wants me to take his place. Margaret's stomach twisted. No, she said firmly. You are not going anywhere. Then Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut. The light flickered. A low, whispering voice filled the air. "Let me out." Margaret's blood ran cold. She turned back to the painting and saw something impossible. The boy's face was changing. His eyes, once solemn, were wide with panic. His hands, previously at his sides, were now pressed against the inside of the canvas, like he was trying to escape. The paint began to shift, melting, warping, revealing something beneath. Another image, another boy. Margaret's breath hitched. There were others before Thomas. Dozens. The painting had been trapping children for generations. And now, it wanted Tommy. Margaret's grip tightened on her son. She didn't care what it took. She wasn't going to let it happen. The attic felt colder than before. The air thick with something unseen, but undeniably present. Margaret's grip on Tommy tightened as she stared at the painting, watching in horror as the layers of paint peeled away, revealing ghostly faces beneath. The whispers grew louder. "Let me out." The voice wasn't just coming from the painting anymore. It filled the room, swirling around them like an invisible storm. Tommy's small body tensed under her hands. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. Margaret knelt beside him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Tommy, listen to me. We're leaving. Now." His lips trembled. "But the boy, we can't help him," she said firmly. "Not like this." Tommy hesitated. Then, for the first time since she had entered the attic, his eyes focused. He nodded. Margaret exhaled in relief. Just as the painting shuddered, a long, splitting sound echoed through the attic. The wood beneath them groaned, and then the canvas began to move. It bulged outward, as if something inside was pushing to escape. Margaret's breath hitched. No, this wasn't possible. The painted hands pressed harder against the inside of the frame, fingers twisting unnaturally. And then, the surface of the painting ripped. A pale, skeletal hand emerged. Margaret yanked Tommy away just as the thing crawled forward, dragging itself out of the canvas. Her stomach twisted in terror. It was the boy from the painting, but he was wrong. His skin was too thin, stretched tightly over his bones. His eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his skull. His mouth twisted into an unnatural, almost inhuman grin. The whispers became deafening. "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." The boy's gaze locked onto Tommy. Margaret moved first. She grabbed the nearest object, a rusted metal lamp, and swung it at the painting. It hit the frame hard, sending dust flying. But the boy didn't stop. His bony fingers reached for Tommy. Margaret grabbed her son and ran. The house fights back. The attic door wouldn't open. Margaret yanked on the handle, her heart hammering. Come on, she cried. Behind her, the whispering grew into a scream. She turned just in time to see the boy crawling closer. His body moved unnaturally, his limbs bending at wrong angles. He was fast. Margaret threw her shoulder against the door. The wood splintered. Then, finally, it gave way. She stumbled into the hallway, dragging Tommy with her. But the house was changing. The walls warped, the shadows stretching and crawling toward them. Every door along the hallway slammed shut. Every light flickered and died. The whispers didn't stop. Margaret ran. The fire. She didn't stop until she reached the living room. The fireplace stood dark and empty. The house groaned as if it were alive. Margaret turned to Tommy. "Stay close to me." His little hands clutched her sleeve. His eyes were wide with fear. "The painting," he whispered. "Doesn't like the fire." Margaret's breath caught. The fireplace. Her gaze darted to the old, rusted poker beside the hearth. She grabbed it. Then she looked at Tommy. "Listen to me, sweetheart. I need you to be brave. I need you to help me." Tommy nodded, though his hands still trembled. Margaret's heart pounded. "We're going to end this." Facing the painting. The attic door creaked open as Margaret and Tommy stepped inside. The painting was waiting. The boy's face twisted in anger the moment she entered. His hollow eyes darkened, his grin growing wider. The air turned ice cold. Margaret clenched the poker tightly. "You're not taking my son," she whispered. The boy's smile vanished. Then he lunged. Margaret swung. The poker slammed into the painting, tearing the canvas. The boy screamed, an inhuman sound that rattled the walls. The attic shook, but Margaret didn't stop. She struck again, and again, until the frame snapped. The faces beneath the paint began to wither, fade. The whispering turned to cries. Margaret turned to Tommy. "The fire, now!" Tommy grabbed the torn canvas and ran. The boy in the painting clawed at the edges, his form melting into the remains of the canvas. "Go!" Margaret shouted. Tommy threw the painting into the fire. The second it hit the flames, the whispers stopped. The house lurched as if something deep within it had broken. Then, a final, piercing scream. The painting burned, and the boy inside it was gone. Aftermath. The house was silent. Margaret and Tommy stood by the fire, watching as the last scraps of the painting turned to ash. The air felt lighter. The shadows had vanished. Tommy looked up at her, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "Is it over?" Margaret knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." Tommy hesitated. "The other kids in the painting, do you think they're free now?" Margaret swallowed hard. "I hope so." She pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. Then, from the attic, a single, final creak. Margaret's breath caught. She turned slowly. For a moment, she thought she saw something. A faint shadow. A small figure. And then, it was gone. The house was just a house again. Margaret took Tommy's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go." As they stepped outside into the warm morning light, she took one last look at the house. And for the first time since they had moved in, she wasn't afraid anymore.